The 18th of March, 2018, Riverview, Florida. Just before midnight, a 911 call comes in to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. A male voice could then be heard coming in and out of the background, and at one point the dispatcher heard the man shout, "She killed me. She killed me." They got a partial address from the woman, but after 4 minutes the call ended. Authorities set off to the house in question, 13248 Pike Lake Drive. As they were on their way, neighbors were calling in too. The woman who made the call ran to her neighbor's house and banged on the door before being followed out by the man holding a shotgun. People started coming outside too as they heard the commotion. One man watched in horror as the man grabbed her and started beating her with the gun. James Gray awoke to the same screams. He looked through the peephole and saw the man standing over the woman, who was now lying face down on the ground just outside his house. He told his fiancée to call 911 and asked if she knew them. She said she recognized the man as Ronnie O'Neill. James walked outside as O'Neill was standing over the woman gripping her arm. Before James could say anything, O'Neill started yelling at him that he didn't understand. "She killed me. She killed me," he kept saying, before dropping the woman's arm and walking back inside. Deputies arrived at the house at 11:49 p.m. to find her still lying in the yard. She was pronounced dead at the scene. As they turned around to the neighboring house, they saw that flames were starting to build inside. The house was on fire. As they approached, the garage door started to open and O'Neill stepped out and started walking towards them. They ordered him to stop and get on the ground, but he ignored them. They eventually had to taser him and force him into the police car. While inside the car, he was agitated and shouting about Kiki being the devil and said, "The kids are the devil's kids." As they started forcing entry into the burning house, a young boy came staggering out. Blood was coming from his mouth and he was covered in stab wounds. He was smoldering from the fire, and one detective said it looked like he had been disemboweled because the injuries to his torso were so severe. He said, "My dad killed my mom," as he collapsed to the ground. One firefighter finally got inside and started sliding along the wall using his hand to guide him. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see an inch past his face. Suddenly he slipped and fell to the floor. It was totally soaked in blood and knives were scattered around everywhere. He put his hand out slowly and suddenly felt someone else. It was a young girl, bleeding heavily and on fire. He carried her outside and placed her on the ground before another firefighter rushed over to him. The girl had been attacked so badly she was totally unrecognizable and was almost decapitated. The firefighter said he just burst into tears, having to be held up by his colleague. Detective Mike Blair was now hurrying to the call out. He'd been in the force for years and had responded to hundreds and hundreds of these, but this one would completely change his life in so many ways. When he got there, the 7-year-old boy, who they now knew as Ronnie Jr., was being airlifted to hospital, and the medics said there was a high chance he wasn't going to pull through. He had been stabbed 20 times, and the two people that were dead were his mother and sister, 33-year-old Kenyatta Barron, who went by Kiki, and her daughter, 9-year-old Renivia Neal, who people called Nivy. The man in handcuffs and on his way to the station was Ronnie O'Neill III. 33-year-old Kiki was his on-off girlfriend, and Nivy and Ronnie Jr. were their 2 children. Kiki had been stabbed, shot with a shotgun and beaten, her cause of death being listed as blunt force trauma. And Nivy had been attacked with a hatchet, shot in the neck and set on fire. He had also stabbed his son repeatedly before setting him on fire and pouring gasoline everywhere else. At 4 a.m. O'Neill went into his first interview with police. He was being held without bond and police needed to determine what on earth had happened. He was very vague and not really present. He couldn't tell them the day all the time, and questions like, "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" seemed very confusing for him. He had joined the Reserve Officer Training Corps and was working odd jobs as a truck driver and in a gaming house. In 2010, he joined Build Your Community, also known as BYC, a local social work group. BYC worked in impoverished neighborhoods, mentoring the youth. Realistically, based on everything everyone had seen and heard on the 911 calls, they already had enough to charge him, but they were hoping he would give them more. As they carried on talking to him back at Pike Lake Drive, it was just a sea of yellow tape and flashing lights. Kiki Barron had recently gone back to school, and was enrolled at Hillsborough Community College. Her son Ronnie said she was a great mom, always saying how proud she was, always playing with them, especially football in the garden. She was a great cook, and he said that she made the best bean pie and chicken wings. Kiki's mom Carrie said that she was her children's biggest cheerleader. She doted on them, and every wall in the house was absolutely full of photos. After a tough few years, she ended things with O'Neill, but against Carrie's wishes, she had offered him a place to stay for a few months while he sorted himself out. 9-year-old Nevy had been born prematurely and had autism and cerebral palsy. She couldn't walk and was nonverbal, relying on a wheelchair and bits of sign language that she knew. Her brother learned some sign language as well to be able to talk to her, and said his sister was regularly being recognized in school because of how happy she was and how hard she always tried. She was obsessed with eating Oreos, loved colorful clothes and earrings, and had a different bow for her hair every day of the week. Detective Mike Blair was gathering information, and with 5 children of his own, he said everything about this hit very hard. No amount of training could prepare you to walk into something like that. Against all the odds, 7-year-old Ronnie survived after being rushed into surgery. He had undergone skin grafting over 30% of his body. His lung had collapsed, and he was relying on a ventilator and a feeding tube. Detective Blair went over to check on him and ended up staying, putting on a movie to comfort him as he drifted in and out of sleep. When Ronnie was well enough to talk, he told them everything he could remember. His story was the same years later, which can be heard in this recorded interview. The next thing he remembered was a mask being put on his face and waking up in hospital. There was a long history of domestic violence and incidents in the household, and Kiki had been calling 911 for years. When the couple were together, they fought regularly about money, about O'Neill's lack of respect for her belongings. She would often tell him to leave the house, and he would refuse, almost always resulting in him completely losing it and rampaging through the home. He would take her car without her permission, and when she asked him to stop, he took the car jack, threw it at the windshield, and said that if he couldn't drive it, then no one could. The police were called out to the house after this, but it was logged as misdemeanor criminal mischief. Kiki accepted a request for prosecution form from the deputy, but she didn't submit it. O'Neill had a long history with the law that went beyond this, everything from drug-related charges to driving without a license and fraud. In the months before this, he had been involved in a drive-by shooting which almost killed him. No one in his family would take him in, and that's when he appeared back at Kiki's house, looking for somewhere to stay. His family added he had a history of mental health issues, and detectives said there was also evidence to suggest that there may have been conflict in the house very recently over his efforts to convert the family to Islam. 7-year-old Ronnie told the deputies from his hospital bed that his parents were talking about God and religion just before the incident. As he awaited his court appearances, his 7-year-old son Ronnie was undergoing painful and intensive treatment in hospital, and he was making a really good recovery. There was one face that was irregular at his bedside: Detective Mike Blair. Although Blair was only supposed to be involved in the case on a very limited basis, he couldn't stop thinking about Ronnie in hospital, what his family had gone through, and what his life now looked like. Another detective mentioned that Ronnie was a big football fan, so Blair reached out to some contacts he had with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, hoping that the team might be able to donate a jersey to Ronnie. The team was happy to help, and the executives even offered to go and visit him in hospital. Blair was the last to leave the room that day, and as he was leaving, Ronnie grabbed his hand and said, "Could you watch a movie with me?" He had to finish his shift, but told him he would be back. He called his wife Danielle, and they both came back over and watched Power Rangers together. A guardian was put in place to supervise Ronnie as he was set up with a foster family. He continued to come back in for various checkups and appointments, and Blair would always make sure to pop his head in and say hi. But on one visit, the detective knew it was time to say goodbye for good and told his guardian, "Well, if he ever needs anything, give me a call." And sure enough, that call came. Ronnie was having such a tough time with where he was living. His guardian called him and asked him what he should do. "Bring him to me," Mike said. And with just the shirt on his back, 7-year-old Ronnie arrived at the Blairs' house. O'Neill was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder, arson, and aggravated child abuse. He pleaded not guilty to all the charges, and the state announced that they would be seeking the death penalty. Before any such trial could commence, O'Neill was in and out of observations with several doctors and experts addressing his mental state. After much analysis and opinion, in October 2018, O'Neill was found not competent to stand trial, much to the dismay of Kiki's family and friends, and 2 months later the courts terminated his parental rights when it came to Ronnie and another child he had with another woman. Back at the Blairs' house, they knew that fostering meant at some point Ronnie would leave them as he transitioned into another home and family. Ronnie had arrived at the house so sad and confused and spent every day repeatedly asking the same questions. Am I going to have to move again? How long am I going to stay? How long am I going to be here? Mike and Danielle quickly realized that they weren't going to be able to say goodbye, and a big decision was made. Ronnie wasn't going anywhere. He was a part of this family now. In June 2019, after further assessments, a judge determined that he was competent to stand trial and it would go ahead, which in June 2021 it did. This 3 years in the making court case would garner national attention as O'Neill decided to represent himself in court, acting as his own attorney, something which, for obvious reasons, everybody advised him against, including the judge. She said, "You know, you have the right to represent yourself. You also have the right to have counsel represent you. Again, I'm going to tell you that there are many potential disadvantages and pitfalls to representing yourself, specifically that you will be held to the same standard that the lawyers would be." But O'Neill demanded that he be allowed to act as his own attorney, saying that the public defenders assigned to his case refused to use the stand your ground defense for the trial, a defense in which Florida states that a person has no duty to retreat and can use deadly force when in fear of great bodily harm or death. But this did not apply in any way to this case. So when he heard this, he decided to drop his lawyers and represent himself. He often screamed at the jurors, was agitated and unpredictable, and his big defense was that the case had been fabricated by the police. The 911 calls Kiki had made were fake, and law enforcement had tampered with evidence and coached his now 11-year-old son Ronnie to say things. And then came a truly unprecedented moment as far as court cases would go. 11-year-old Ronnie would testify against his father, and his father would cross-examine him. Detective Blair also went on the stand and told the jury about how he and his wife now had Ronnie living with them, and when it came time for O'Neill to talk to him, he took a long pause and everyone held their breath, wondering what he was going to say about this. He said, "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart to the top of my head. Thank you for what you've done. No further questions, Your Honor." Blair left the courtroom. The way O'Neill behaved throughout this entire trial put everyone on edge. Experienced trial lawyer Anthony Rickman was not involved in the case but had, along with most people, been following it. He said, "You have the person who is accused of 2 heinous murders, screaming at the jury. When you look at how he presented himself throughout the case, pacing the courtroom, his body language, his gestures, his rage, his anger, the mood swings, he painted a picture of what he probably looked like when he committed these murders." It was now time for the closing arguments. After a 2-week trial, all was said and done, and it was down to the jury. They talked for just a few hours, and their verdict came as no surprise. He was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, 1 count of resisting law enforcement, and arson. During the penalty phase of the process, deciding whether he would actually be sentenced to death or not, he changed his tune and chose to let the lawyers take this part. His defense team argued that he had schizophrenia and delusional disorder and was shot just months before the murders, raped as a child and suffers from PTSD. They said it was an idle mind in a devil's workshop, adding, "Capital felony was committed while the defendant was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance." O'Neill escaped the death penalty, as in Florida it must be a unanimous decision. Instead, he was sentenced to life without parole plus 60 years. Carrie, Kiki's mom, spoke to him in court, calling him a coward and saying that the wrong decision was made by the jury. The prosecution agreed and said that they felt they presented a case that was indeed fit to be punished by death. Kiki's sister DeSato was devastated at the result as well. Ronnie O'Neill III addressed the court for one final time, and Judge Michelle Cisco told him if he raised his voice again like that, she would just ask him to leave. She gave her final thoughts in a powerful speech, sometimes fighting back tears and sometimes struggling to even find the words, all while trying to remain as professional as possible. But this case had left her sick. O'Neill later appealed for a new trial, but this was denied and his conviction was upheld. The staggeringly cruel events of that night back in March 2018 are frankly hard to think about. Carrie said Kiki and Nivi were the light of so many lives, lights that were dimmed far too early and in the most barbaric way. She said, "Family and my life. I breathe for my family and now you've got me gasping for air." Their lives came to an unbelievably terrifying end and Ronnie has been left with a trauma that is just not able to be understood. That being said, it is here that we end today's episode with a silver lining amidst such a stormy sky. Ronnie O'Neill is now officially Ronnie Blair, and he is doing amazingly well in his new home with Mike and Danielle. His new older brother Hunter said he quickly became like any younger brother. He's an extremely strong, funny kid. It's hard to picture our family without him. Ronnie said, "They are the best mom and dad and they really take care of me. There is no one else better than them. It means a lot to me to have a family that can always help me get through the things I need to get through. I feel loved. They got me through the trial and they were always there by my side if I cried or needed help. I could share my feelings with them and I felt like I could explain everything to them and it would get better." Ronnie loves performing in films and hopes one day to become an actor. He loves playing with the family dog, swimming and traveling with everyone. As well as the Blairs to help him, he is finding his feet again with regular therapy sessions. "Whatever lies ahead for Ronnie, we want him to go after it and do it," said Detective Mike Blair. They all know that nothing can ever replace what Ronnie lost. Mike said, "Daniela and I told him we don't ever expect to replace his mom and dad. Ronnie does have fond memories and remembers times before that night that were very positive. They always make sure his mother Kiki and sister Nivi are spoken about all the time and are regular names in their house. And every time Ronnie has moments of stress, anxiety, or anger, they have a family mantra. Something Mike says to him every night before bed. Hey, remember, what are you? And although the now teenage Ronnie will sometimes smile and roll his eyes, his answer is always the same. I am safe, I am loved, and I am part of this family. In 1966, a tragic incident occurred when Everett Delano was fatally shot during a robbery at an auto repair shop in central New Hampshire. However, years later, new evidence discovered at the crime scene shed light on the case. Prior to the incident, Everett Delano led a busy life, juggling various roles such as a security officer, an overnight watchman, and even taking on part-time shifts at a combination gas station. His dedication to providing for his 3 children, Daryl, Darlene, and Denise, led him to work an exhausting 60 hours per week. Due to his career in the U.S. Navy, which involved radar and radio operations, the family had the opportunity to live in different locations across the country. From Rhode Island to Florida, and from California to South Carolina, they experienced a nomadic lifestyle. Despite the constant changes in scenery and friendships, their connection to Everett's extended family in Orange, Massachusetts, and his wife's family near New London, New Hampshire remained steadfast. Although Everett would occasionally be away for extended periods while serving at sea in the Mediterranean, he made sure to spend quality time with his family when he was in town. As the children grew older, the family yearned for stability, leading them to settle down in Wilmette, New Hampshire, near his wife's family. This small town nestled in the valleys of the mountains between Concord and Lebanon provided the sense of permanence they desired. In 1964, Everett retired from the Navy, marking the end of his successful career as a chief petty officer. Transitioning to civilian life proved challenging for him as he had held a position of authority and responsibility in the Navy. His son, Daryl, suspected that this adjustment may have been difficult for him. Despite his efforts to find work in radio or television repair, Everett struggled to secure a job close to Wilmette as he was accustomed to short commutes while living on base. The prospect of commuting for over an hour to larger nearby towns was not appealing to him. Despite actively seeking other opportunities, Everett worked as a security officer during the night shift at Colby Sawyer College in New London and also took on shifts at a gas station in Andover. On September 1, 1966, just like any other day, Everett drove past the familiar colonial-style buildings with their iconic green shutters and dormer windows as he made his way down Main Street in Andover. Even in 2021, Andover remained a small town that lacked a stoplight. He arrived at Sanborn Auto Body where he was employed. The owner, Kenneth Sanborn, had a partnership with Gulf Oil, resulting in a typical Gulf service station. It consisted of a two-bay garage connected to a small office area with a walk-up window for most of the gas transactions. The building had a flat front with a notch top, adding a touch of architectural charm against a backdrop of white siding. Additionally, the town's post office was housed within the same building, making it a bustling center of activity for the community. Customers could get their cars fixed, collect their mail, and fill up on gas all in one place. At 8:50 a.m. that morning, Kenneth asked Everett to hold down the fort while he ran some errands. Everett primarily assisted in the office, handling transactions and refilling customers' vehicles with fuel at the pump. This was a time when gas stations offered full service, with attendants providing assistance. Between 8:50 a.m. and 9:25 a.m., there was regular activity, with transactions occurring approximately every 10 minutes. The cash register tape indicated 3 sales during this time. At 9:25 a.m., a local resident who was familiar with Everett drove by the station and greeted him with a wave. At that moment, Everett was in the process of reversing a vehicle and reciprocated the gesture with a smile and wave. Between 9:25 a.m. and 9:35 a.m., an armed robbery took place at the Sanborn Auto Body Shop, with Everett being the sole employee present. The thief confronted Everett and took all the money from the cash drawer, estimated to be around $75 to $100. The perpetrator, however, was unsuccessful in locating the concealed cash box that held an additional $500. Shortly after the robber's departure, a white vehicle pulled up and its occupants patiently waited, hoping for assistance in refueling their tank. Growing increasingly impatient when no attendant appeared, they were relieved when a couple of individuals arrived around 9:45 a.m., spotting the white car leaving. The woman behind the wheel shrugged her shoulders, indicating her lack of knowledge regarding the attendant's whereabouts, before driving away. Curious, the newcomers entered the office and heard what seemed like snoring. They noticed a man lying face down on the floor and assumed he was intoxicated. Closer to 10 a.m., 3 more men arrived and were informed by the 2 individuals present that someone was asleep inside. One of the men peered into the office and made a shocking discovery: a pool of blood forming beneath the man's head. He immediately contacted the New Hampshire State Police and the nearest hospital in New London. Meanwhile, one of the men from the initial group drove to a nearby Sanborn residence to inform Kenneth's wife. As they surveyed the scene, they realized that this was not just a simple incident, but a tragic crime scene. The police and paramedics arrived promptly and Everett was swiftly transported to New London Hospital, where his condition was stabilized. Initially, the police suspected that he had been brutally beaten, but it was only upon examination by medical professionals that they discovered he had been shot 3 times in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. Everett's condition was critical and he was transferred to Mary Hitchcock Hospital with little hope for recovery. Tragically, the following day at Mary Hitchcock Hospital, Everett succumbed to his injuries, leaving behind a devastated family who had lost a beloved father and husband. In the midst of the chaos, the police diligently worked to process the crime scene. Remarkably, the water in the men's restroom had been left running since the gruesome discovery, thanks to an incredible stroke of luck. Sanborn's wife, displaying immense wisdom and quick thinking, made sure not to disturb the faucet handles when she arrived. Instead, she shut off the water pump from outside to stop the flow. The investigating officers believed that the robber, who may have been the last person to touch the faucet, could have left behind a fingerprint on the shiny chrome fixture. With great care, the state police crime scene technician managed to extract a high-quality latent fingerprint from the faucet. The police conducted interviews with everyone present and thoroughly canvassed the neighborhood. Their efforts led them to Everett's friend, Marilyn, the woman he had waved to, and they even found a witness who heard the 3 gunshots while driving by the service station. According to the witness, the shots were fired at approximately 9:45 a.m. However, it was Everett's watch that provided the final word. A bullet had struck his watch, freezing the hour and minute hands at the exact time of the shooting, which was 9:35 a.m. Shortly after, an autopsy was performed, revealing that 2 of the gunshot wounds to Everett's head were inflicted while he was standing, while the third, which had gunpowder residue near the entry wound, occurred when he was on the ground. The murderer clearly intended to eliminate any potential witnesses. On September 7th, 6 days after the crime, the fingerprint lifted from the faucet was sent by the New Hampshire State Police to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for inclusion in their national database. In the following months, the state police meticulously checked purchase records of .22 caliber firearms and collected guns from nearby residents in Andover, as well as from individuals who had recently bought such handgun in the vicinity. The guns underwent ballistic testing, but none of them had discharged the bullets found at the crime scene or in the victim. Additionally, the investigators explored the nearby Blackwater River, hoping to find the discarded weapon, but their searches yielded no results. As a result, the case went cold by the end of 1966. In 1975, Rockwell International, a technology company, secured a contract to develop 5 automatic fingerprint readers. These devices were then delivered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and over the subsequent years, the FBI successfully converted 15 million criminal fingerprint cards into digital records. This marked the beginning of the modernization of the outdated ink and paper fingerprint card system. Within the next decade, Rockwell sold similar systems to numerous major metropolitan police departments across the United States. By 1999, the FBI's database, known as the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, had become the world's largest fingerprint database, containing the fingerprints of 64 million individuals that were readily accessible to law enforcement nationwide. In 2009, the Cold Case Unit was established in the state of New Hampshire to investigate unsolved homicides. However, Everett's name was not initially included in the list of cases. He had been forgotten. It was not until 2013 when Everett's youngest daughter, Darlene, contacted the authorities that renewed efforts were made to solve the 47-year-old cold case. Surprisingly, the fingerprint found at the crime scene had never been compared to the known criminals in the office database. Gone were the days of manually comparing fingerprints, as the FBI's digital database in 2013 provided a swift method of matching crime scene prints against millions of individuals with criminal records. After analyzing the fingerprints collected from the bathroom faucet, investigators received a positive match. This match was further verified by cross-checking with the State Police Forensics Lab, confirming that the fingerprints indeed belonged to Thomas Cass, who was 20 years old in 1966. The lab also conducted tests on the hair found in the cash register and the cigarette butt discovered on the ground. Unfortunately, they were unable to extract any DNA from either of these items. It is worth noting that Thomas Cass had a significant history with the law. Between 1966 and 2000, he accumulated a total of 13 convictions for various offenses, including theft, armed robbery, aggravated assault, and even escaping from prison on 2 occasions. His final conviction in 2000 in Vermont was for manufacturing drugs within a federal prison. In the autumn of 2013, after 47 years had passed since the crime was committed, investigators from New Hampshire met with Thomas Cass. During their meeting, Cass informed them that he had enlisted in the Army at the age of 18, around 1963, and left 3 years later with a general discharge, which typically indicates some form of discrepancy. Cass admitted to spending a significant portion of his life behind bars and acknowledged his criminal history. However, he vehemently denied any involvement in Everett's murder. Furthermore, he claimed to have no knowledge of his own identity and even professed ignorance about the location of Andover, stating that he had only visited the state once in his lifetime. Several months later, investigators arranged a second meeting with Cass, during which they requested a DNA sample. Cass agreed to provide the sample. However, when asked to undergo a polygraph test, he declined. Around this time, individuals close to Cass, including friends, family, and his ex-wife were also interviewed. His ex-wife revealed that Cass initially presented himself as a businessman and a criminal when they first met. She mentioned that Cass was employed as a roadie for a rock and roll band called Miles Connor and the Wild Ones, which was known for its energetic New England rock and roll, reminiscent of Jerry Lee Lewis's lively piano tunes. Additionally, Cass's ex-wife informed investigators about the challenging circumstances he faced while growing up, with an alcoholic father and an abusive household. She also mentioned that he had a history of violence and had made numerous threats to kill her. As a result, she obtained a restraining order and eventually divorced him. She also revealed that Cass would often boast about his criminal activities, proudly identifying himself as a career criminal. She strongly believed that he had no qualms about causing harm to others in order to achieve his goals. Several months later, in February 2014, investigators unexpectedly visited Thomas Cass. They informed him that forensic evidence collected from the scene of Everett Delano's murder in 1966 had linked him to the crime. However, Cass chose to remain silent and requested legal representation. Following the interview, a search warrant was issued in an attempt to locate the .22 caliber handgun, but unfortunately the murder weapon was not found. 4 days later, on February 24, 2014, Thomas Cass tragically took his own life with a .45 caliber handgun at the age of 67. His girlfriend, Jane, informed the 911 operator that he believed the police were coming to arrest him that day in connection with a cold case. In an attempt to evade imprisonment once again, he decided to take matters into his own hands. In 2014, the cold case unit informed the Delano family about the fingerprint match and the primary suspect's suicide. With Cass's death, they expressed confidence in identifying the killer and stated that an official announcement would be made, along with the release of their findings in a report. However, it took 5 years to produce the report, which was finally released on February 20, 2019 by the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit. They officially declared that after 52 years, the case had been solved. Susan Morrell, an assistant attorney general for New Hampshire who supervised the Cold Case Unit, explained that the reason for the delay in announcing the resolution, despite knowing about it prior to Thomas Cass's death in 2014, was due to the rigorous verification process and the department's limited resources and staff. The Delano family has expressed their gratitude towards the initial investigators of their father's homicide and the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit. They are thankful for the diligent efforts that have led to this day where they have finally received some measure of justice. Despite the fact that Everett Delano and his family never truly got justice as Cass evaded law enforcement by taking his own life, the Delano family can find solace in knowing that their father's mystery killer is no longer out there. On that fateful morning of August 9, 1982, a truck driver stumbled upon a horrifying scene. As he went about his routine delivery at the Woolworth Garden Center, he made a chilling discovery: a lifeless female body lying amidst the bushes. The truck driver's heart must have skipped a beat as he noticed the woman's wrists bound behind her back with her own shirt, her jacket tightly wrapped around her left ankle. And to make matters even more gruesome, blood stain adorned the cinder block wall just above her lifeless form. The details that unfolded during the investigation were nothing short of nightmarish. A medical examiner revealed that this poor soul, identified as Karen Stitt, had suffered a brutal fate. She had been mercilessly stabbed a staggering 59 times in various parts of her body. Her neck, chest, abdomen, and back bore the marks of a heinous crime. Cause of her untimely demise was determined to be the fatal stab wounds to her chest and neck. Now, the question that lingers in the air is, who was Karen Stitt? What led to her tragic end? Was this a crime of passion, a vengeful act, or the work of a deranged serial killer on the loose? Sunnyvale, situated in Santa Clara Valley in northwest Santa Clara County, California, is a city that holds historical significance as it lies along the renowned El Camino Real and Highway 101. It shares borders with various neighboring areas, including San Jose to the north, Moffett Federal Airfield and National Aeronautics, and Space Administration Ames Research Center to the northwest, Mountain View to the northwest, Los Altos to the southwest, Cupertino to the south, and Santa Clara to the east. According to the 2020 United States Census, Sunnyvale has a population of 155,805, making it the second most populous city in the county and the seventh most populous city in the San Francisco Bay Area. Notably, Sunnyvale stands out as one of the few cities in the United States that has a unified Department of Public Safety. This unique department ensures that all personnel are trained as firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical technicians, enabling them to respond effectively to emergencies in any of these roles. Karen Stitt, born on July 25, 1967, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Robert Stitt and Catherine Leschewski, had recently relocated to Palo Alto High School from her hometown. Despite being new to the area, Karen quickly adapted to using the El Camino Real bus routes to travel between her boyfriend's home in Sunnyvale and her father's house in Palo Alto. On September 2, 1982, Karen and her boyfriend spent the evening together, enjoying video games at a local 7-Eleven. Later, around midnight, they ventured towards Golfland, a popular miniature golf course. Eventually, at approximately 12:30 a.m., Karen's boyfriend left her near a bus stop at the intersection of El Camino Real and South Wolf Road. She planned to take the 22 bus back to Palo Alto. Tragically, the following morning, Karen's lifeless body was discovered just 100 yards away from the bus stop, along a bustling stretch of road filled with bars and restaurants. Investigators observed that the leaves and dirt around her feet had been disturbed and kicked, indicating that she may have still been alive when her body was moved to that location. The boyfriend expressed remorse for leaving her, but was concerned about facing consequences for returning home late. Despite the police department's collection of all genetic evidence at the murder scene, investigators were unable to identify a suspect, resulting in the case going cold for over 4 decades. Stitt's boyfriend was initially considered a suspect, but was eventually cleared through forensic DNA analysis in the early 2000s. By the year 2000, advancements in DNA analysis technology enabled investigators to create a genetic profile of the suspect using a bloodstain found on the cinder block wall above Karen's body. Swabs taken from the crime scene and items collected from the victim were also sent to the Santa Clara County Crime Laboratory. Analysis revealed that the DNA from an unknown male found on the wall matched the DNA profile from Stitt's jacket and sperm cells found on vaginal slides taken during her autopsy. However, Stitt's boyfriend's DNA did not match and he was excluded as a suspect. Despite comparing the unknown profile to a national DNA crime database, no matches were found. In 2021, Detective Hutchison received a tip suggesting that a male member of the Ramirez family might be responsible for Stitt's murder, prompting him to initiate a genealogical search. The identity of the tipster remains anonymous, as per police protocol. However, public records such as U.S. Census data indicated that the Ramirez family resided in Fresno, approximately 160 miles away from Sunnyvale, as early as 1950. Detective Hutchison discovered that there were 4 living Ramirez brothers after conducting further investigations. 2 of the brothers were ruled out as suspects, and the 3rd brother was conclusively cleared through DNA analysis. This left Gary Ramirez as the primary focus of the investigation. In early March, Hutchison successfully identified Ramirez's daughter and obtained a DNA sample from her on April 8th. The court documents did not disclose the method used by the detective to obtain the sample. The detective stated that investigators have discovered compelling statistical evidence linking the DNA of Ramirez's daughter to the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. This has led to Ramirez being identified as the primary suspect in the murder of the Palo Alto teenager 40 years ago. Gary Gene Ramirez, a 75-year-old man, has been accused of abducting the victim from a Sunnyvale bus stop, raping her, stabbing her 59 times, and then disposing of her body nearby. Through the analysis of bloodstains at the crime scene and the utilization of DNA and genealogy tracing, Ramirez, who was residing in a guest house on the Hawaiian island of Maui, was apprehended on August 2nd. Despite having no prior criminal record, Ramirez's 79-year-old brother, Rudy Ramirez, expressed shock at his brother's arrest and insisted that the authorities had apprehended the wrong person. Rudy revealed that Ramirez had served in the Air Force and had lived in various locations such as Colorado, Utah, San Diego, San Francisco, and Fresno, where he was raised. Ramirez had been married twice and had worked in different occupations, including as an exterminator, before retiring due to a hip injury. Rudy mentioned that he had lost contact with his younger brother in the 1980s, around the time of Karen's murder. During that period, Ramirez had temporarily resided with their mother in Fresno, and it was then that Rudy had invited him to move to Maui. According to Rudy, Gary had a privileged upbringing in Fresno and had no history of violence. He was a successful individual who seemed to excel in everything he pursued. However, as the years went by, Gary became more withdrawn. Despite the overwhelming DNA evidence against Ramirez, authorities are diligently working to corroborate various aspects of the case. They are urging anyone who may have had any connection with Ramirez throughout the decades to come forward with any additional information. The unexpected but long-awaited breakthrough in Karen's murder case has brought both surprise and relief to her friends and family. Ramirez's arrest has resurfaced painful memories that were buried deep within. Karen's time in Palo Alto was short-lived before her untimely death. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, she had recently moved to the Bay Area with her brother and father. Despite her brief stay, she left a lasting impression on her classmates. Michael Calhoun, a former boyfriend, fondly recalls his first encounter with Karen when she transferred from Pittsburgh to Palo Alto during his sophomore year in high school. He describes her as someone special, someone he was eager to know. Her radiant smile, beautiful feathered blonde hair, and unique way of speaking set her apart from other girls he knew. Calhoun clarifies that he was not the boyfriend who accompanied Karen to the bus stop on the night of her tragic demise. Living just around the corner from her, he initially refrained from pursuing a relationship with her due to her involvement with one of his close friends. However, he couldn't resist his feelings for her and eventually started dating her after seeking his friend's approval. Calhoun admits that he fell deeply in love with Karen, considering her his first true love. Although they took a break from their relationship over the summer, expressed interest in rekindling their romance once school resumed. As a symbol of their connection, she entrusted him with a copper ring engraved with her name, a keepsake he still cherishes. Unfortunately, their plans to reunite were shattered when Karen was tragically taken away from everyone. Calhoun vividly remembers attending her funeral on his first day back to school as a junior. Calhoun remained steadfast in his belief that Karen's murderer would eventually be brought to justice. Losing her inspired me to pursue a career in law enforcement, not necessarily to solve her case, but to assist others in need, Calhoun explained. Even after relocating to Las Vegas, I kept in touch with the cold case detective in Sunnyvale. He mentioned that he was relatively new to the force at the time of the incident. He also shared that he was present at the crime scene that tragic night, making him intimately familiar with the details of the case. Thanks to advancements in genealogy technology, law enforcement agencies are now able to crack cold cases that had previously remained unsolved. This not only brings closure to the families of the victims, but also ensures that dangerous criminals are held accountable for their actions. The sleepy town of Hamburg, New York, home to about 60,000 people, with many making the move there with the intention of raising a family and settling down for life. The Wells family were just the same. Lawrence Wells Jr., known to everyone as Larry, was happily married to his wife Jill, and they had a 4-year-old daughter, Maddie. The couple had just found out they were expecting their second child too, another little girl. Larry and Jill had been high school sweethearts, meeting at 15 and dating shortly after. They went to college together and Larry focused on teaching. He had always wanted to work with children, and after getting his master's, he started working as a substitute teacher and mentor. Jill said if he had a little kid who had problems at home, he would take them under his wing and make sure they had the best possible life they could have at school. Sadly, however, due to the economic conditions at the time, no school was able to offer Larry anything permanent and could only carry on doing things on a temporary basis. Jill said they were ready to buy a house and start their family at this point. So her husband knew that as much as he loved teaching, he needed to get something more solid. A little deflated but undeterred, he went straight into the job hunt and started working his way up the retail management ladder. He soon found a position that he thought would suit him perfectly. Larry was a big kid at heart. He loved toys, gaming and gadgets, and working with and spending time with children was something he enjoyed. So when his local Toys R Us was looking for a new assistant manager, Larry went for it. It was certainly a different pace than what he was used to, but Larry took the long hours, overnight shifts, and weekend and holiday working in his stride. He said he loved seeing the kids come running through the doors, dragging their parents by their arms and pointing down the aisles at all the toys. With a 4-year-old daughter himself, it just made him happy. When he wasn't in his store, you could find him taking Maddie to a Chuck E. Cheese or having long walks on the beach with Jill. He just liked the simple things. On the morning of June 29, 2013, the Hamburg Toys R Us was about to experience one of their busiest mornings. New lines were coming in and the delivery was big. On days like this, the store would be open as early as 1 a.m., right the way through until closing time. Today, it was Larry's delivery shift to manage. He woke up at around 3 a.m. and set off. At 8 minutes past 4, Larry let the delivery driver in to start unloading the stock. At 4:30 a.m., the same driver was let out via the back door, and Larry carried on with his morning. Just before 5 a.m., 2 employees named Richard and Anthony arrived to start their shifts. There was always a radio left outside so that people could let management know when they arrived. The manager would then let them in, but lock the door straight away. Richard and Anthony radioed Larry, but they got no response. Richard walked around the side building where he found an open door. This was surprising as all exterior doors were always locked. He clocked in and entered the store anyway, alongside 2 of the coworkers who had the same idea, Isaac and Cindy. The delivery needed working and everyone just carried on. Perhaps Larry was still checking off the delivery or on a conference call. The store was so big after all that they could all often go hours without even bumping into each other. But a few minutes later, the store alarm started to go off. The first thing that Larry would do when he started his shift was deactivate the alarms. With still no answer on the radio, Cindy headed off to try and find him. The noise was starting to annoy everyone. Suddenly, over the piercing wail of the alarm came a scream. Cindy had walked into the office and found Larry slumped in his chair. The phone was beeping and off the hook, and he was bleeding heavily from his chest. It looked like a gunshot wound. Under the fair assumption that a gunman might still be inside the building, the employees ran out of the store and a frantic Cindy called 911. Armed officers arrived quickly and tentatively entered the store, fully prepared for a standoff with a shooter, but they couldn't see anyone around. Moving into the office, they found Larry clinging to life with a very weak pulse. It was not a gunshot, but 3 stab wounds to his chest. He was bundled into the ambulance, but tragically just before he reached the hospital, he succumbed to his injuries and died. A SWAT team was now in the building, and it was confirmed that whoever had killed Larry was definitely no longer there. For something like this to happen in a locked building full of cameras, with people inside and working, the whole situation was even more shocking, especially to have happened to someone like Larry. Journalists and detectives said that the crime rate in Hamburg was as close to non-existent as you could get. So something like this was jarring. They didn't know whether Larry had unlocked the door by mistake and it was a chance intruder, or if it was a worker with their own key. In terms of who would want to kill Larry, it went without saying that he had no bad blood with anyone and no disgruntled employees. Going into the office, they noted that nothing really seemed out of place. It looked exactly how you'd expect an office to look. It didn't look like anything had been taken and no drawers were open. But looking around Larry's desk, they did spot that the main cable for the CCTV system had been pulled out. A 2007 University of Florida Gators cap had also been left on the floor too. This definitely seemed out of place, and it did have a lot of DNA on it to be able to test. The 4 employees at the Toys R Us at the time were pulled in for questioning right away, and the police were on the fence with everyone. Isaac was nervous under investigation. Richard had arrived late to work with no alibi for where he was before. Cindy had been the first to find Larry, and Anthony actually refused to answer any questions, which seemed odd. Believing that the baseball cap was a key part of finding Larry's killer, they took DNA swabs from all 4 of Larry's coworkers to compare to it. It was confirmed that the same DNA on the hat was also a match to the DNA found on the cable which had been pulled to stop the camera's recording. But this DNA was not on the police's file. Jill said as heartbroken as she was, the support that was coming in for her and Maddie via social media was so lovely and overwhelming. Toys R Us employees nationwide, as well as people with no connection to Larry at all, were sending their love, and reading all the nice things that people had to say was putting a smile on her face. The Facebook page had almost 3,000 supporters in just a few days. The head of loss prevention for the region was Bernard Groucher, who went by Bernie, and he was soon called into the store by head office. He was ready to help the police with the cameras and check over the building. He was a frequent face in that particular Toys R Us, and Larry knew him well. The cameras showed that at around 4:20 a.m. someone had been lurking outside the front door for a few minutes before getting inside. It was unclear whether they had forced the door open or unlocked it. They entered the store in dark clothing covering their face. Experts felt confident that it was a man, but apart from the hat, there was nothing they could make out. They had done a good job of concealing themselves, and the camera quality was poor at best. Larry's killer started moving quickly through the aisles, zigzagging around. He was careful to avoid some of the cameras, and he was hard to keep track of. On one camera, though, they could make out him wearing the same cap that was left in the office, and he was carrying a huge knife in his right hand. At 4:32 a.m., the person moved into the office. The door was open and Larry was not inside. 7 minutes later, at 4:39 a.m., all the cameras stopped recording, and this was the moment the cable had been pulled out. There were no cameras inside the office either. Larry entered just after this and walked right into his killer. They all stood there looking at the black screens, helpless, with no clue as to where to look next. Bernie burst into tears, telling officers that Larry was more than a colleague. He was a friend of 6 years. Bernie had even been the one to interview and hire him. Detectives could definitely say one thing with certainty now. They were sure the suspect knew the store's layout before he went in. It seemed so unlikely that a random intruder would risk doing something like that, with all of the lights in the store on, knowing that there had to be people inside working. But investigators had taken DNA from dozens of employees at this point and hadn't gotten a match to anyone. Despite the initial feelings and possible suspicions they had about the 4 people working there that morning, through DNA testing they totally ruled out Richard, Anthony, Isaac, and Cindy. They had lost their boss and friend and found him dying. What happened unsettled all of them, so it was no wonder they were nervous and didn't really want to talk. Authorities were hitting a wall though, as good as it was that they were ruling people out. They weren't adding any suspects to the list, and things were coming to a grinding halt. It had now been 3 months since Larry was killed, and Jill along with the police were worrying that it might not get solved. Police in Hamburg were scared that someone could not only have got away with murder, but they were still out there walking the streets. Jill said all she could do was sit by the phone and wait. Larry's 36th birthday came and went, and then there were all the holidays coming up. Larry loved dressing up with Maddie for Halloween. Then would be Thanksgiving and then Christmas. All of these things she had to help their 4-year-old through as well, who didn't really understand what was going on. And then Jill would be having her second baby without her husband by her side. It was a very vulnerable and scary time for her. Policemen are desperate and enlisted the help of the FBI, knowing they needed more resources. They suddenly realized they were missing a DNA swab from one person, someone that was around the store a lot. Someone that had been helping the police from the start with the investigation, 38-year-old Bernie Grusher, the regional loss prevention manager, and now that they thought about it, he had avoided participating in the DNA test several times, and often for silly reasons police called Bernie again, asking for a quick meeting for a sample. It seemed unlikely that he would be involved, but ruling him out was still a good thing to do. Bernie said he would, but he was at a Toys R Us conference and would get back to them. They then called the Toys R Us head office asking when the conference was over and when they could expect him back in Hamburg. Their stomachs dropped when the person on the phone replied, "Conference? There is no conference." It was clear that Bernie wasn't going to be coming to them anytime soon, so they needed to go to him. A few days later, they tracked him down at his father's house, and fortunately he was there, but he didn't seem nervous at all and was happy to cooperate. And just 20 seconds after they knocked the door, they had their swab. A quick turnaround in testing left everyone stunned. It was a match to the baseball cap and the cable. Was it really possible that the person who had been so keen to help, so willing to show them the cameras, the man in charge of security for the region and someone who had sat and cried with Larry's family at his funeral, was his killer? They wasted no time and headed back to interview him. When asked about the DNA on the power cord, he said this was silly to even question given the fact that it was his job to look at the cameras in all stores, and this occasionally involved unplugging things to reboot them. His DNA being on the cable was nothing, and they could probably find it on all the cables in all the offices in all the stores. But the ace up their sleeve was the baseball cap. Bernie said he hadn't got a clue. He didn't know of any such cap. Police offered him an out, asking if it was some sort of argument that had got out of control. Bernie started panicking. Realizing that this was going from bad to worse for him, he said he needed a lawyer and the interview came to an end. He was so adamant that he had nothing to do with this and with no motive standing out as to why he would want to do this, it was a worry for detectives. Had they got this all wrong? But to everyone on the outside, Bernie's life was a stark contrast to the reality. And this motive would soon become clear. Everyone thought that Bernie had it all. A gorgeous, recently renovated home which he shared with his wife and 2 children, new cars on the drive, and a great job with a fantastic salary and lots of benefits. But he was actually well over $1 million in debt, and his wife Heather had kicked him out, obtaining a restraining order against him in the process. He had pushed and shoved Heather, ran upstairs and shot the gun. She found him face down on the floor. When she rolled him over, he said, "I wanted to see if you still loved me." She described his behavior as violent and bizarre. And after he moved out of the house, he started renting a new place with his girlfriend. His house was full of brand new sealed toys and expensive electronics, all boxed up and labeled and all stolen from various toys or stores up to hundreds of miles away from Hamburg. He had been selling it all on eBay, making around $200,000 so far. And being part of the regional management team, getting access to any store whenever he wanted was not hard for him. After all, who was going to look at someone in charge of security as a threat or problem? Given how brazenly he had marched around Larry's store that morning, knowing there would be people working a delivery showed just how confident he had become with his scheme. They also found a memory card which showed Bernie filming various toys or stores with a secret camera, scouting out the stock and camera locations. In July 2014, faced with a concrete case against him, Bernard Groucher finally pleaded guilty, but to the charge of manslaughter instead. Through his lawyers, he said that killing was never the intention. Larry was essentially collateral damage in his plan to steal from the safe in the store. Bernie said he had planned it all from the start. He tried to make it look like he didn't have the keys when he got to the front door that morning, spending a few minutes outside pretending to force it open, to throw police off the scent. When Larry entered the office, Bernie came at him from behind the door, brandishing the knife and telling him to open the safe. But Larry instantly lunged at him, fighting him back and refusing to open anything. Larry tried to grab the scarf covering his face and in the process knocked his cap off. Bernie then stabbed him 3 times and fled the office, just as Larry fell to the chair, grabbing the phone to try and call for help. His friends said that it was Larry all over. His colleagues were his friends and he would have fought back to protect not only himself, but them as well. Little did he know that the person who had done this to him was someone he called a friend. Bernie's lawyer said, "At the time my client committed this offense, he was trying to get money to support his family. He did not anticipate encountering Larry Wells. The death was the result of an unfortunate encounter in an enclosed space. He knew Larry Wells. Larry Wells was a friend of his. He had no desire to see Larry Wells harmed. But it had to be noted that he had turned up to the store with a knife. This indicated that he was at least prepared to use it. Why bring it otherwise? One detective said it is common for burglars to not arm themselves and to use stealth. They are there to either steal money or property and get out, as opposed to robbers who announce themselves, who come in with guns blazing. Bernard Groucher was sentenced to 25 years plus 5 years probation. This was the maximum length of time he could get, and the judge said the maximum was absolutely the only option. Larry's joys and loves in life were simple: his job and his growing family. When he woke up that early morning, it was a work day like any other, and by mid-afternoon he would be home again, ready to take his daughter out for dinner and play games. It was such a totally senseless and heartbreaking killing, at the hands of someone Larry not only trusted as a colleague but saw as a friend too. Matt Chandler, a local journalist, had followed the case closely and talked to a lot through her grieving process. With a young daughter of his own, he told Jill he couldn't imagine having to explain that a parent wasn't coming home. Jill said that she and Maddie had written little letters to him, sending them to heaven in balloons. This inspired Matt to write a book about helping children to grieve and understand death. It was called Balloons for Heaven, and the illustrator put Larry, Jill, and Maddie in there together as a tribute to a wonderful father, husband, and friend. Larry's drawing had wings and was wearing his favorite football team's jersey as well. The book came out on the 1-year anniversary of his death, and Matt donated all the money made from the book launch to Jill and their girls. Before he died, Larry said he liked the name Peyton for a girl, so Maddie gained a new sister, Peyton Larry. Everyone says Maddie not only looks like her father, but has his personality too. Jill said, "I lost my husband, my best friend, the man who I love so much. We were supposed to grow old together, raise our children together and watch them grow up. But instead he was taken from us. Our daughter lost the best father she could have. They did everything together. She doesn't understand how someone could take her father from her. I want to make sure she remembers all the memories, and I'll keep showing her all the pictures and telling her stories so she always knows how much her dad loved her. He was amazing." We will be discussing the case of Sharon K. Hammack, a 26-year-old woman who tragically lost her life on October 3, 1996. Let's delve into who Hammack was and the events surrounding her untimely death. Caledonia Charter Township, located in Kent County, Michigan, holds a significant place in history. Established as a survey township in 1838, it now forms part of the bustling Grand Rapids metropolitan area, situated approximately 10 miles southeast of the city itself. However, beneath its seemingly ordinary exterior lies a dark tale that unfolded within its borders. Sharon K. Hammack, born to Jacob and Lois Gross, initially led a normal life. She married, had 2 children, but unfortunately, the couple's differing opinions led to their separation. This separation, coupled with feelings of loneliness, drove Sharon towards drug abuse, which soon became her closest companion. Despite her desire to quit drugs, financial constraints forced her into sex work to support her family and fuel her addiction. It was during the late hours of October 2, 1996 that Sharon found herself in an unfamiliar and dangerous situation. The following day, on October 3, 1996, a delivery person on their regular route stumbled upon a body wrapped in a carpet. Recognizing the severity of the situation, they promptly alerted the authorities in Kent County. Deputies from the county arrived at 76th Street Southeast, between Patterson and Craft Avenue in Caledonia Township, where they discovered the lifeless body of a 29-year-old woman named Sharon K. Hammack. This horrific incident involved sexual assault, strangulation, 2 stab wounds to the head, hog tying, and the dumping of the victim alongside a highway. The assailant left behind DNA evidence, including vaginal and rectal samples, as well as various items, such as a rope used for hog tying. Tragically, Sharon, a mother of 2 and 4 months pregnant, fell victim to this heinous crime. This murder was one of the 12 Grand Rapids murder sprees in 1994. Despite the collection of DNA evidence, the lack of resources and technological advancements at the time hindered the identification of the assailant. Consequently, this case grew cold. In the years that followed, a series of crimes plagued the highways connecting the United States, Canada, and Mexico borders. Over 500 murders occurred along these routes, with more than 200 potential suspects identified. These strings would also establish a connection between instances of human trafficking that took place across different states. The likelihood of the culprits being long-haul truck drivers was high due to the multi-jurisdictional nature of these abhorrent crimes. In 2006, the Maryland State Police initiated an investigation into the murderer of a woman who had been assaulted and fatally stabbed. The assailant had left behind DNA evidence on the victim's body. Over the years, there had been an increased focus on patrolling the highways due to the rising number of crimes, and this particular murder bore striking similarities to Sharon's case. Despite the heightened police presence, it took until recently to apprehend the murderer. On August 16, 2022, a routine traffic arrest was made involving an individual named Gary Artman. When the police ran a background check on his identification, they discovered that he had been arrested in 1982 for a sex crime and had served a 10-year sentence in Michigan before being released in 1992. Consequently, the Mississippi Highway Patrol took him into custody and reached out to the Kent County Sheriff's Office in Michigan. The DNA evidence found at the crime scenes on the highway was verified to match Artman's DNA. Through the collaborative efforts of the Mississippi State Highway Patrol, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations, the Forest County Sheriff's Office in Mississippi, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in Alabama, the Columbia County Sheriff's Office in Florida, the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, the Kent County Prosecutor's Office, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, utilizing immunoglobulin G, it was determined that the DNA of the perpetrator from the 2006 Maryland case and the 1996 case of Sharon K. Hammock belonged to the same individual. Immunoglobulin G analysis revealed a familial connection within the DNA sequence, ultimately leading to the identification of Gary Dean Artman. His previous records indicated that he had been residing and working in Michigan at the time of Hammock's murder. Further investigations uncovered new evidence that linked Gary Dean Artman to the crime scene in Ontario, California, just before the tragic homicide took place. It was discovered that Artman was within a 20-mile radius of Ontario at the same time, as confirmed by local authorities. These crucial clues led to the arrest of Gary Dean Artman after 26 long years, and he is currently being held at the Forest County Sheriff's Office in Mississippi. The Kent County Sheriff's Office is actively working on extraditing Artman to Michigan, although the process is still ongoing. Finally, after all these years, the cold case has been solved thanks to the relentless efforts of dedicated police officers and the aid of advanced technology. Their unwavering commitment to justice has brought closure to the families who have suffered the loss of a loved one. On August 18, 2022, one of the detectives assigned to Sharon's case personally visited Terry Nowitzki's, Sharon's sister, at her home in Walker. The detective wanted to ensure that the family received the news of the arrest firsthand. Additionally, the detective spoke with Tina DeYoung, another one of Sharon's sisters, over the phone. "We got him," the detective informed DeYoung, quoting this exact words. DeYoung was left speechless, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. "It's a whirlwind of feelings," she expressed to the police. "I'm happy, but at the same time, I'm filled with sadness." The news of the arrest brought back the pain of losing her sister, but DeYoung expressed her gratitude towards the Kent County Sheriff's Department for their unwavering dedication to solving the case. Unfortunately, Sharon's parents, Jacob and Lois Gross, had passed away before justice could be served. "We've achieved justice for her," DeYoung whispered on Thursday night, gazing up at the sky. "I'm sorry it didn't happen while you were still with us, but justice will prevail. You can celebrate with her up there." The police had been meticulously investigating the 1990 murders and had spoken with Terry Nowitzki's in mid-May. "We desperately want to know who did this to her. It was an unimaginable tragedy for all the girls. Just absolutely heartbreaking," Terry tearfully expressed. Sharon was a devoted sister, daughter, and mother to her 2 children, and her absence is deeply felt. Terry revealed that Sharon was pregnant for 3 to 4 months when she was tragically killed, leaving behind a child we were unaware of. Sharon had big dreams for her children and wanted the best for them. It was heartbreaking to witness her spiral into addiction and end up on the streets despite her desire to get clean for her kids. Family finally found some solace after the perpetrator was brought to justice. Sharon Hammock was not the only sex worker to meet a tragic fate in Michigan during the 1990s. She was one of 12 victims in the Grand Rapids area, most of whom struggled with addiction and engaged in sex work, making them vulnerable to predators. The bodies were often found in skeletal condition, making it difficult to gather forensic evidence. Lisa Ortberg was the first victim discovered in 1994, while Victoria Moore was the last known victim in 1996. A task force was established to investigate these murders, with officers from various regions coming together to solve the case. The victims were often targeted while working in the red light district of Grand Rapids or had connections to a women's shelter called Rose Haven. Brenda Delicki, the director of the shelter, expressed her belief that a serial killer was at large, given the pattern of these crimes. Lieutenant Carol Price from the task force mentioned in response, "While we acknowledge the possibility, we are not solely focusing on that theory." No charges were filed in any of the cases, but there is now an investigation into the potential involvement of Artman in the deaths of not only Sharon, but also other sex workers in Grand Rapids. It is also being considered that he may have committed similar crimes in states like Maryland. If he did indeed use his transient trucker lifestyle to abduct and harm vulnerable women, it could mean that many families who have been searching for answers about their missing loved ones may finally find closure. After 6 years, progress has been made in solving a long-standing cold case in Colorado. Back in 1988, unidentified human remains were discovered in a field located in Baca County. As a result, Jane Doe was laid to rest in a local cemetery. This particular narrative revolves around the unearthing of human remains on the desolate terrain of a Colorado farm in early June 1988. Transforming into a cold case, it would take another 30 years before it could be resolved. Whose remains were they? How did the enigma gradually unfold? In 2022, the long-standing cold case of Nora Castillo, a 34-year-old woman, was finally resolved. This intriguing story takes place in Springfield, Colorado, a small town located in the southeastern corner of the state. With a population of over 1,000 residents, Springfield is primarily known for its farming and ranching community. Surprisingly, the town had no idea that a perplexing mystery had unfolded on its land back in 1988, which would take more than 3 decades to unravel. On June 3, 1988, the Baca County Sheriff's Office received a call from a local farmer in Colorado. The farmer reported the discovery of what he believed to be human remains on his farm, situated approximately 20 miles southeast of Springfield in Baca County. This open field was frequently passed by truck drivers, yet the shocking find remained hidden until that day. Then Sheriff Willard Goff, along with then Coroner Robert Morrow and their team of deputies, promptly responded to the scene. Their initial assessment confirmed that the remains were indeed human, scattered throughout the property. The remains were in a deteriorated skeletal state. Although most of the human skeleton was present, some bones were missing, and those that remained were discolored and bleached. Remarkably, a portion of the spine still remained connected. The authorities sent the remains to the coroner's office for a thorough autopsy, while investigators meticulously combed the area for any potential leads. Regrettably, despite their efforts, no evidence was found that could unveil the identity of the victim. The Baca County Coroner's Office and the Sheriff's Office dedicated several days to searching the farm with the assistance of the farm operator. They meticulously documented various items discovered on the property and meticulously screened the soil for any possible clues. Unfortunately, their endeavors yielded no results in identifying the remains or shedding light on the circumstances surrounding the person's death or how they came to be in the farmer's field. The remains were so badly damaged that it seemed impossible to uncover any valuable information that could help identify the person. Despite their best efforts, authorities were unable to unmask the individual's identity. After a thorough forensic examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to a young woman, estimated to be between 19 and 24 years old. She was of average height, standing somewhere between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 4 inches, and weighed around 130 pounds. Although her hair was brown, the degraded condition of the remains made it impossible to determine her eye color. The woman was found wearing specific clothing items, including gray corduroy Levi jeans with the leg cuffs hemmed up to a 27.5-foot inseam, a beige-colored winter coat with a white synthetic fur collar and 4 fur cuffs, and a 34B bra. Interestingly, a quarter from 1986 was discovered in her pocket. Despite extensive efforts, forensic experts were unable to confirm the victim's ancestry. However, she exhibited characteristics that suggested she may have had Hispanic or Latino, Native American, and European heritage. The woman had undergone significant dental work, including 2 silver cast crowns on the left side of her mouth, indicating a possible connection to Mexico or the border region. Additionally, it was determined that she had likely never given birth. The remains were estimated to have been there for 1 to 3 years before their discovery, and her cause of death was deemed suspicious, most likely a homicide. Unfortunately, without any leads on her identity, authorities were unable to locate any of her relatives to provide closure to her family. Consequently, she was given the name Baca County Jane Doe. In 2005, Jane Doe was laid to rest in the Springfield Cemetery accompanied by copies of the case information, while the original records were kept at the Sheriff's and Coroner's Office. Despite the lack of significant evidence, authorities remained determined to solve the case and made numerous attempts over the years to identify her. Dental impressions were taken and the victim's dental records were sent to the National Crime Information Center in an effort to find a match in the missing persons database. DNA samples were also collected and submitted for analysis. Although DNA technology was still in its early stages when it came to identifying victims, an anthropological study was conducted on the remains to gather any possible evidence that could aid in identification. Additionally, a facial reconstruction was created to provide an idea of the victim's appearance. The fillings in her teeth were even examined to determine where she may have been before her death. Numerous potential matches, including dental matches, were received, but each one was ruled out after comparing them with the remains. Press conferences were held to share details about the case and encourage the public to come forward with any information, but unfortunately no leads were generated. Despite the investigators' diligent efforts, the identity of the deceased remained unknown and the case went cold. However, after more than 3 decades, unexpected assistance came in 2021 when an investigative intern working for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contacted the Baca County Sheriff's and Coroner's Office. They requested permission to submit the data from the 1988 Baca County Jane Doe case to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, a national database and resource center for families searching for their missing loved ones, established in 2007. Although there was no immediate breakthrough, the renewed attention to the case brought forth additional resources and possibilities. In an effort to make progress in the case of Jane Doe, Baca County Sheriff Aaron Shiplett collaborated with the Baca County Coroner's Office, pooling their resources together. Members from both agencies dedicated their time to consolidate relevant case information from their respective files into the Sheriff's Office database using the original documents that were nearly 34 years old. Once all the information was uploaded, a team of detectives was assigned to analyze it. Simultaneously, Shiplett reached out to a genetic genealogy lab, hoping that advancements in technology could potentially help identify Jane Doe. In July 2021, the Baca County Coroner's Office established contact with Solved by DNA, genetic genealogy company based in Castle Rock. This company specializes in investigative genetic genealogy and advanced DNA testing of crime scene DNA or DNA from unidentified human remains. They create a DNA profile from the unidentified DNA and then utilize traditional genealogical research to determine if a suspect or unidentified person may have a place in a family tree based on various DNA databases. However, there was a hurdle in solving the case. Although Jane Doe's DNA records were present in the original investigation files, the technology available at the time was limited, rendering those records insufficient for a familial DNA study. New DNA samples were required to proceed with the investigation. On December 13, 2021, under the leadership of Shiplett, an investigative team from the Baca County Sheriff's Office exhumed Jane Doe's remains from the Springfield Cemetery and obtained fresh samples for familial DNA testing and research. The samples were then sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in Pueblo for analysis before the remains were reburied. Following a brief analysis, the new DNA profile was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System by the Central Bureau of Investigation. In August 2022, a breakthrough occurred in the case of Baca County Jane Doe. Solved by DNA, a renowned organization informed the Baca County Sheriff's Office and Baca County Coroner's Office about a potential familial DNA match. They had successfully identified a person through their extensive DNA research who could potentially be a family member of Jane Doe. With this crucial lead, the Baca County Sheriff's Office wasted no time and immediately began their mission to track down and contact other potential family members. Their efforts paid off as they were able to establish contact with several individuals who could be related to Jane Doe. Solved by DNA then requested these family members to submit their own DNA for analysis, an essential step in determining the familial connection. It was a month later, on September 26, 2022, when the Baca County Sheriff's Office received another significant update. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System informed them about a separate familial DNA match for Jane Doe. This match led them to a person residing in Texas who had submitted their DNA to the McAllen Police Department back in 2004. The individual was desperately searching for their missing mother, Nora Castillo. It was Nora's daughter, Josie Castillo, who had provided her own DNA to the McAllen Police Department in hopes of finding her mother. The missing person report for Nora Castillo had been filed in 1996, even though she had gone missing in 1986 or 1987. The McAllen Police Department's records revealed that the last contact with Nora was a collect call from somewhere in Colorado shortly before her disappearance. After conducting further DNA testing and analysis, the Baca County Jane Doe was finally identified as Nora Castillo. For Josie Castillo, this revelation brought a mix of emotions. Growing up, she hadn't spent much time with her mother as she lived with her father. However, she still cherished memories of Nora as an outgoing person who loved to laugh and smile. Unfortunately, Josie also recalled how social services became involved in their lives when she was just 6 years old and her sister, Crystal, was 3. During a difficult period in Nora's life, she made an attempt to take custody of them while they were living with their father in New Mexico. Unfortunately, her actions landed her in trouble and eventually led to her imprisonment in Hobbs, New Mexico. From there, she was transferred to a mental institution and no one saw her again for many years. After their mother mysteriously disappeared, Nora's daughters were left wondering about her whereabouts and how they could find her. Finally, after nearly 36 years, Baca County Sheriff's Office announced that Nora Castillo's family had discovered her location. Both Josie and Crystal, Nora's daughters, were informed about their mother's fate. Although their hopes of finding her alive were shattered, they were grateful to finally have some closure after all those years of waiting. This news came out of nowhere, and it's overwhelming, Crystal expressed. Despite still seeking answers about her mother's untimely demise, Josie found solace in knowing where her mom was. Thanks to genetic genealogy, my heart is starting to heal. There's a sense of healing now, Josie shared. Nora's family has been able to visit her final resting place and the location where she was discovered. However, authorities are still in the dark about the circumstances surrounding Castillo's death. The details of Nora Castillo's death and her presence in Colorado are still under investigation. This case is being treated as a potential homicide, stated Baca County Deputy Coroner Everett Brissendine. We're hopeful that we'll receive some tips that will shed light on why and how she died. After 3 decades of being unidentified, Nora finally found her way back to her family. However, even in death, justice continues to elude her. On November 17, 1978, a person cutting firewood near Lake of the Woods and the Dead Indian Highway in Oregon stumbled upon human remains. Klamath County sheriffs were notified and began their investigation and determined the victims were 19-year-old Kirk Leonard Weissman and 17-year-old Cynthia Lynn Freyer. They had both been shot and Cynthia had been sexually assaulted. Remains of a small dog were also found along with a dog carrier. It was determined that the couple had been hitchhiking through the area and had a sign that read K Falls, which stood for Klamath Falls, but investigators were unable to find any connection they had to it. They were originally from the suburb of Sepulveda in Los Angeles, California, and had hitchhiked all the way to Everett, Washington to visit relatives. On September 23, 1978, they boarded a plane in Everett along with their dog and flew to Eugene, Oregon. From there, it's believed they hitchhiked to Roseburg where they stayed the night in a motel. They were then picked up by someone that claimed to have dropped them off at a Grants Pass restaurant. One of the few items recovered from the scene was an unmailed letter written by Cynthia addressed to her mother, which mentioned the fund they recently had in Washington state and spoke of their hopes and dreams. Evidence collected from Cynthia was stored with hopes of later processing it with advancing technology. In 2018, they would try to identify a suspect by submitting multiple items to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab. In 2019, the lab was able to obtain DNA from an unknown male. The DNA recovered was entered into CODIS, but did not return any confirmed results. The lead detective reached out to Parabon Nanolabs for assistance regarding DNA forensics, a rather expensive request with a price tag of $8,000. A sample was produced in coordination with Marshall University that Parabon could analyze. In 2021, using genetic genealogy, C.C. Moore of Parabon was able to find a viable suspect. His children agreed to give their DNA for comparison and confirmed it was definitely a match. The viable suspect was confirmed as Ray Whitson Jr., who died in Texas in 1996 due to medical reasons. The detective spoke with his family and learned that Whitson had lived in the Klamath Falls area from 1976 to 1982, and his children had gone to school in that area. In that time, Whitson worked at a lumber mill near Klamath Falls and owned a small caliber pistol, the same type of caliber as the murder weapon. The area where the couple was found is the same route that he would take his family on camping trips and visit friends in the Ashland area. Through the investigation, it was determined that Whitson had no criminal record, and it remains unclear how the incident even happened. Whether the victims were hitchhiking from Ashland to Klamath Falls or back, it is believed that Whitson came upon them and offered a ride. Detectives were able to finally return evidence to Cynthia's family, including the letter she had written and a pair of her earrings. Tina Fells was born April 27, 1969 to Shirley and Stephen Fells. At the age of 14, she was a student at Foothill High School in Pleasanton, California. On April 5, 1984, Tina was walking home from school on a path that connected through Astor Court to Lemonwood Way and through the I-680 underpass to her home in Valley Trails. She usually took the bus home, but she wanted to avoid some girls who were bullying her and had even thrown rocks at her. Instead, she took a shortcut through a drainage culvert close to the freeway that students would often walk through. After walking into the culvert, she was never seen alive again. At 3:25 that day, fellow students would find her body in the culvert. Sadly, with no witnesses or leads to follow, police were unable to make any progress in the case, and it would go cold. 27 years later, in 2011, it was announced that DNA linked a spot of blood found on her purse that was left hanging on a branch to Stephen Carlson. Carlson was 16 years old at the time of the murder and was already in jail for unrelated crimes when he was charged with Tina's murder. During Carlson's trial, a former friend testified that on the day Carlson murdered Tina, Carlson was bullied and tossed into a dumpster at Foothill High School after a confrontation with members of the football team. He was also known to be into morbid things, and at times it involved animal cruelty. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 2014 and sentenced to 26 years to life in prison. 3 years later, a 3-judge court of appeal panel reduced the conviction to second-degree murder, saying prosecutors hadn't proved the element of premeditation and deliberate intent needed for a first-degree murder conviction, which decreased his sentence by 10 years. Carlson has a criminal record that includes convictions for drug and sexual crimes and now murder. He denied any involvement until 2020 when he finally confessed to her murder in a 9-page letter sent to her family. He also wrote a letter to Tina and the state parole commissioner. In the letter, he apologized and said he didn't intend to kill her. He recalled seeing Tina walking from school in the field across the street from his house. At the time, he was in a drunken rage over being bullied and laughed at by his classmates that day. He was also anticipating his parents coming home and seeing the damage to their room from a party he had thrown and believed his dad would attack him. He said he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and it all happened very fast. Before later moving away from the Pleasanton area, he had told peers that he had committed the crime, which made him a suspect but could not be linked to the crime, and he said he had just been joking. He also had severe problems with alcohol and drugs, which only increased after Tina's murder, especially since he dropped out of high school. Tina's remains were cremated and scattered over the Yosemite National Park. While it took 27 years to solve the crime, at least her family now has some closure. Daryl Renee Johnson was born September 24, 1972 to Deanna and Dennis Johnson. At the age of 9, she lived in Nampa, Idaho at 552 Greenleaf Street and was a 4th grade student at Lincoln Elementary School. She was on the Optimist Club soccer team, loved animals and her family. She was described as a good student and a little shy until she got to know you. On February 24, 1982, she left home at 8 a.m. and began walking to school, which was about 6 blocks away. She only made it about half a block to the intersection of Greenleaf and High Street when she was abducted. Some school children told detectives at the time they'd seen a suspicious vehicle in the area. It would take 3 days of extensive searching before her body was found by a group of fishermen in a shallow drainage ditch in Melba, Idaho along the Snake River. While her death was ruled a homicide, the actual details are way too brutal for this video. Not even a year later, her neighbor, Charles Irvin Fane, was convicted of her murder and sentenced to death. He had owned a vehicle matching the description of the suspicious vehicle which had been seen by the other children who were playing near where Daryl and had disappeared. Even though he passed a polygraph test, it wasn't admissible in court. A forensic expert from the FBI claimed that 3 hairs found on Daryl and his body were probably Fane's. Also, 2 jailhouse informants claimed that he had confessed to them about the murder. As the years went by, Fane always maintained his innocence and never gave up on trying to prove it. Finally, in 2001, nearly 18 years after his conviction, he was exonerated and released from death row and the case reopened. 6 years later, Fane was issued nearly $1.4 million in compensation because of the Idaho Wrongful Conviction Act. The FBI has formally acknowledged that for decades, examiners from the FBI laboratories, Microscopic Hair Comparison Unit, provided flawed forensic testimony to favor prosecutors in over 90% of their cases. Today, microscopic hair interpretations are rarely used as corroborating evidence. Nowadays, if a hair has an attached root, nuclear DNA can usually be obtained. A hair without a root, the most part, can only produce mitochondrial DNA, which is much more challenging and less detailed. Years later, forensic testing showed that those 3 pubic hairs on her body belonged to convicted sex offender David Allen Dalrymple. Using the DNA profile, a genetic genealogist was led to a Dalrymple family tree branch of 4 sons and 2 daughters. After ruling out 5 of a set of 6 Dalrymple siblings, the remaining David Dalrymple could not be excluded. He was living in Nampa at the time of the murder, which he denied during questioning. He also said he was in the military, but investigators knew that he was discharged in 1981, a year prior to the murder. He refused to give a DNA sample, but a warrant ordered the DNA collection which matched the hair found on Daryl's underwear. Investigators believe that Dalrymple may have had additional victims. He was a violent man who had even told one of his sexual abuse victims that he would make her disappear if she ever went to the police. At the age of 62, he was charged with Daryl's sexual assault and murder. He was already serving time for kidnapping, lewd conduct, and sexual abuse involving a minor in 2004. That same year, he was also convicted of second-degree kidnapping in a separate case. More than a decade earlier, in 1991, he was convicted of battery. His victim reported that she was assaulted and told she deserved to be killed. In 1991, he had choked a woman, but the aggravated assault charge was later amended to misdemeanor battery. These are just a fraction of the assaults he committed on women and minors. Police believe he has more victims and have identified at least 2 other young girls who say they were molested by him but never reported it. Daryl was loved by many, but her life was tragically taken. Thankfully, her real killer now remains behind bars, and I personally hope that one day someone will take that smirky-ass grin off his face. Candace Elaine Rogers was an only child born to Elaine and Carl Rogers and was known by her family as Candy. At the age of 9, she was a 4th grader at Holmes Elementary School, lived in Spokane, Washington, and was described as friendly, shy, and well-mannered. On the afternoon of March 6, 1959, she set out walking to sell mints for the Campfire Girls near her home at 2106 1/2 West Mission Avenue. This was the last time she was ever seen alive. After she went missing, 6 boxes of Campfire mints were found strewn along Pettit Drive. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 1,200 searchers scoured the area for her. 3 Fairchild Air Force Base airmen, searching in a helicopter for Candy, tragically died the day after she went missing when they accidentally flew into high-voltage lines over the Spokane River. Meanwhile, 2 other airmen hunting in some woods found a pair of girls' blue suede shoes about 7 miles from Candy's home, leading to a more extensive search of that area. The next day, March 22nd, 16 days after Candy went missing, her body was found. She was found about 3.5 miles northwest of Spokane Falls Community College, about 200 yards from an abandoned rock quarry, and 130 feet off Old Trails Road. Her death was ruled a homicide and would go unsolved for 62 years. Grape-smelling gum found on her clothes appeared to link her murder to Hugh Bion Morse, a serial killer known to chew that flavor who had allegedly killed at least 4 women. He was the suspected killer until 2001 when DNA evidence would clear him. Another potential suspect was 50-year-old Alfred Graves, who lived on North Cannon Street and was found to have collected clippings about women and children who had been sexually assaulted. Strangely, the day Candy's body was found, he committed suicide in his car by way of carbon monoxide. Another potential suspect was James Howard Barnett, who hanged himself in jail in 1960 for days after he was arrested on suspicion of a sex crime against a child. In 2021, the Spokane Police Department enlisted the help of Othram Incorporated, who was able to take the degraded DNA of the killer and create a genetic profile. It was then uploaded to online genetic databases, and the genetic genealogists were able to narrow the match down to 3 brothers. One of those brothers was John Rehoff, who was 20 years old at the time of the murder and lived near Candy but was never a suspect. However, they were unable to immediately obtain his DNA because on June 30th, 1970, he committed suicide, but thankfully his daughter assisted police in solving the case by submitting DNA samples. The results showed it was 2.9 million times more likely that Hoff's daughter's DNA was related to the recovered specimen than the general population. This allowed investigators a warrant to exhume his body to collect DNA. His DNA indicated with a probability threshold of 25 quintillion that the semen found on Candy's clothing came from him. In 1961, 2 years after Candy's murder, he was arrested for strangling and robbing a woman in Brown's Addition and served 6 months in jail for the assault. He used the same MO as Candy's killing. He was also an army deserter who became a door-to-door salesman. He was previously buried in the same cemetery as Candy, but his family moved his remains to another site after learning he was responsible for her death. Candy's parents were divorced at the time of her murder. Her father killed himself in June 1963 in a hotel in Walla Walla, Washington, and sadly, her mother died in September 2006, never knowing who had taken her daughter's life. In the early morning hours of July 7, 1985, Jane Anker Hilton, a 54-year-old woman seeking refuge from a troubled marriage, was tragically found beaten and stabbed to death in a bedroom at her employer's house. The discovery was made by 2 fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The senseless murder left investigators puzzled, and the case remained unsolved for 14 long years, until it was reopened by 2 determined detectives in 1999. Unfortunately, a misquote in an article led investigators to wrongly suspect Ricky Davis, who was eventually tried and convicted for the crime, despite maintaining his innocence throughout the process. However, refusing to give up, Davis sought assistance from the justice system that had incarcerated him. After 15 years, he was finally exonerated when the real killer was identified through genetic genealogy testing, thanks to the unwavering dedication of a group called the Innocence Project, who were committed to uncovering the truth. Jane was a well-known figure in El Dorado Hills, California, where she worked as a columnist for Foothill Times. She frequently covered social events in and around town for the newspaper and was a loving mother to her 6 children, often using poetry to inspire them. Additionally, she was working towards obtaining her real estate license and had been married to Archie Hilton since 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage had begun to deteriorate, leading Jane to seek assistance from her employer, Wilma Klein. Wilma, who owned a spacious home in El Dorado Hills, graciously welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, Autumn, into her residence on July 6, 1985. The house was already occupied by Wilma's daughter, Maureen Klein, her boyfriend, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl. It was a bustling household, and little did Jane know that her first night there would tragically be her last. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl returned from a party to find Autumn waiting outside, unaware of the horrific events that had unfolded within. She informed them that she had returned home late and was worried that her mother would be upset. All 3 entered the house and discovered blood in the hallway. As they entered Maureen's room, they found Jane Hilton's lifeless body covered in blood on the bed. Maureen and her boyfriend were away on a camping trip at the time. Ricky and Connie immediately called 911, but unfortunately Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigators started interviewing those who were close to Jane to gather more information. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was questioned and provided detectives with an alibi and DNA evidence. Despite being a suspect due to their troubled relationship, Archie claimed that there was no animosity between them. After being cleared, the case went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl mentioned to investigators that they returned home in the early morning to find Autumn waiting outside. Upon entering, they discovered blood in the hallway leading to Jane's room where they found her lifeless body. They suspected that an intruder might have been responsible for the tragic incident. The case remained unsolved for 14 years until it was reopened in 1999 by El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald. During their investigation, they came across a news article that led them to an interview with Connie Dahl, where she mentioned finding Jane's body positioned as if she were sleeping. This statement contradicted a previous statement made by Ricky Davis in an audio recording. Detective Fitzgerald mistakenly believed he heard him mention that the body was discovered on the floor. At that time, Dahl was serving a prison sentence in Oregon for unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for questioning and initiated a 3-hour interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original account. However, over the next 18 months, she underwent 4 interrogations. Detectives were found to have employed tactics that could lead to a false confession. Dahl was coerced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter, Autumn, in the murder. She was threatened with a murder charge. The condition that she cooperated, she would receive a reduced sentence for manslaughter and serve only a year. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald informed Dahl that DNA evidence would be used to track the suspect. In reality, no DNA evidence was introduced into the case during that time. Testing had not been conducted on the DNA recovered from the crime scene. By displaying crime scene photos and utilizing details from the crime, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators fed her the information they desired. Throughout, the 4 interviews began to crack. She started to recall details from the crime, enabling her to fabricate an entirely different version of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl claimed that Autumn was present during Jane's murder and got sprayed with blood. In another, she admitted to being the one who bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl alleged that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She claimed that Davis wanted Autumn to accompany them to a party. When Jane refused, Davis flew into a rage, resulting in Jane's death. Her narrative evolved to align with the information provided. However, she could not recall the murder weapon or its eventual location. Dahl had accused her ex-boyfriend Davis of Jane Hilton's murder, making him the primary suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn were interviewed separately after Connie Dahl confessed to the crime. Both Davis and Autumn maintained their original versions of events. Detectives attempted to deceive Davis by falsely claiming that Autumn had also implicated him in the murder. However, Autumn informed the detectives that she had no reason to protect Davis. Despite the detectives' efforts to manipulate them by threatening culpability, Davis and Autumn remained steadfast in their accounts. As a result, the detectives relied on Dahl's confession to apprehend Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain in exchange for testifying against Davis during his trial. The first trial ended in a mistrial, but Davis was eventually convicted in 2005 during his second trial. Dahl took the witness stand and recounted her struggle with Jane, accidentally biting her on the shoulder. She stated that she left the scene while Davis continued the brutal assault. Hearing the victim's pleas and gurgling, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for second-degree murder solely based on Dahl's testimony. Dahl, on the other hand, received a lesser charge of manslaughter and served a 1-year sentence in the county jail. Tragically, Dahl passed away in 2014 due to a drug overdose. Meanwhile, Davis persisted in proclaiming his innocence and sought assistance from the Northern California Innocence Project in 2006. He reached out to them in the hopes of proving his wrongful conviction. The Northern California Innocence Project, established in 2001 by Kathleen Ridolfi and Linda Starr, is a nonprofit clinical program affiliated with Santa Clara University's School of Law. Upon Davis's contact with the project, his case underwent a comprehensive re-examination. The collaboration between the Northern California Innocence Project and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office resulted in the retesting of DNA recovered from the crime scene. The post-conviction evidence, which included Hilton's nightgown and biological material under her fingernails, revealed an unidentified male DNA profile. Both the DNA from Hilton's fingernails and nightgown were determined to originate from the same source. As a result, Davis, Dahl, and Autumn were excluded as potential contributors. This discrepancy proved that Dahl's testimony contradicted the physical evidence and was likely fabricated. Furthermore, the DNA analysis confirmed Archie Hilton's innocence, although he had unfortunately passed away before the results were released. The obtained DNA profile was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA system, but no matches were found. Despite the evidence supporting Davis's claim of innocence, there were still obstacles that needed to be overcome. The Northern California Innocence Project successfully argued that if the DNA results had been presented during Davis's trial, the outcome would have been different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required new evidence to unequivocally establish innocence, making it an extremely challenging threshold to meet. In 2015, Richard Leo, an expert in false confessions, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations and concluded that the detectives' methods were aimed at coercing Dahl into adopting a narrative that aligned with their preconceived notions about the murder of Jane Hilton. In 2016, the Northern California Innocence Project co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134, which allowed wrongfully convicted inmates like Davis to demonstrate that new evidence would likely have a significant impact on a jury. Melissa O'Connell, an attorney from the Northern California Innocence Project, filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence, with the testing conducted by former California State Senator Mark Leno. The legislation was approved in January 2017, aligning California's standards with those of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian overturned Davis's 2005 conviction, scheduled a new trial to commence in the fall of 2019. However, due to the defense attorney's health issues, the trial was rescheduled for April 2020. Unexpectedly, the trial's fate was altered once more. Breakthroughs in DNA testing resulted in Davis becoming the first person in California and the second in the United States to be cleared of a crime. Genetic genealogy, a novel DNA testing method, involves analyzing DNA evidence from a crime scene and submitting it to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to identify potential matches. In February 2020, DNA evidence was linked to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson revealed in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the individual connected to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, numerous individuals spoke to the media about the man known as Michael Green. Green, a longtime resident of Roseville, California, graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. Described as easygoing, kind, even-tempered, and super chill, Green's classmates were shocked by the allegations against him. One classmate, who preferred to remain anonymous, expressed disbelief that Green could commit such a heinous act in El Dorado Hills. Reports indicate that Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter, Autumn, encountered Green and his friends, Calvin and Stephen, at the park. They spent time together before Autumn left to shower at home, allegedly informing her mother that she was going to a friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. The events that followed remain speculative. Investigators suspect that during this period, unlawfully entered the residence and encountered Jane, resulting in a struggle as she tried to escape. It is believed that Green may have attacked her in a state of frenzy. Subsequently, Davis, Dahl, and Autumn discovered Jane's lifeless body upon their return home. Prior to and following the murder, Green had no prior criminal convictions, leading to the assumption that he had lived a normal life, until DNA evidence linked him to this horrific crime. The other two boys who were with Green were located shortly after his arrest. Unfortunately, Calvin had passed away some time ago while Stephen was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. Stephen was treated as a witness rather than a participant. Green was apprehended on February 11, 2020, and due to his status as a teenager at the time of the offense, He made his initial appearance in a juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Pearson explained that procedurally, the court had to follow certain steps within the juvenile justice system. Consequently, was granted a transfer to be tried as an adult. He endured a 2.5-year wait before his trial commenced. On July 29, 2022, Green entered a plea of no contest, thereby waiving his right to a jury trial. This plea meant that he would face a charge of first-degree murder without the opportunity to challenge the plea or its consequences. The sentencing date was scheduled for September 27, 2022, with Judge Suzanne Kingsbury presiding over the proceedings. During the sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, an esteemed professor in psychological science education, was called upon to provide expert testimony on adolescent development. Dr. Kaufman's research shed light on the unique emotional and cognitive needs of adolescents, particularly during the late adolescent stage. This stage is characterized by an individual's ability to comprehend right from wrong, albeit with diminished impulse control. The defense presented multiple witnesses from Green's past, some of whom maintained relationships with him well into adulthood. Each witness was questioned about their changed opinion of him following his confession. All witnesses expressed shock upon learning that he was responsible for Hilton's murder. Those who knew him in different capacities described him as cheerful, popular, humorous, and affectionate. These descriptors were used both before and after the tragic event. Green's ex-wife Karen Green stated, "There's simply no malice in Mike." Following the witness testimonies, each of Jane Hilton's children delivered their victim impact statements. They all detailed the irreparable loss caused by Green to their family. Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters, expressed, "The reasons behind it and the alternate life I could have had will haunt me forever." Artie the Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, shared, "I cherished my mother and I assume Michael cherishes his mother as well. I wonder how he would feel or what he would say to the person who brutally attacked your mother 29 times. How would you react if you received a call early in the morning informing you of your mother's death?" The court listened to her emotional account of collecting her mother's belongings from the house where she was murdered. Arditha concluded with a poignant statement, "We will always share one thing: regret over the foolish decision you made 37 years ago." Ian, Hilton's son, echoed his sister's sentiments, describing the family's uncertainty and recurring nightmares, particularly after his sister Autumn was wrongly accused. Overwhelmed with emotion, he tearfully added, "No words can ever bring my mother back." Autumn, the last to speak, conveyed her deep anguish as she recounted the suspicion she had endured for the past 20 years. Recounting the events of that day, recalls the arrival of 2 detectives with crew-cut hair and thick mustaches at her house. They informed her that they had found the individuals responsible for her mother's death. However, instead of providing comfort and closure, Autumn found herself being accused repeatedly of biting her mother and assisting in moving her body. It was at that moment that Autumn realized the severity of the situation and uttered the word, "lawyer," to protect herself from further intimidation by the investigators. Following this, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he questioned Green about the brutal manner in which he ended Jane's life. Linden highlighted the numerous wounds on her head and face, mentioning Green's own admission of kicking her jaw and biting her shoulder. He emphasized that Green's actions not only took Jane's life, but also shattered the lives of many others. Linden further asked Green if he had ever considered who Jane truly was, pointing out her accomplishments and the love she had for her children. During the closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, argued that he was unable to control his actions due to his adolescent state of mind at the time. She stressed that he did not comprehend the wrongfulness of his actions. Husher based her argument on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She pleaded with the court to show mercy, citing various penal codes and court rules. However, Judge Kingsbury intervened, firmly stating that probation was not an option and effectively silencing any further defense comments. In response, Linden expressed gratitude to the court and condemned the application for probation as offensive. He believed that granting probation would be allowing Green to escape the consequences of his actions once again after already evading justice for 37 years. Judge Kingsbury acknowledged the numerous arguments surrounding adolescent development in murder cases but did not entertain the idea of probation. She noted that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was the most brutal case she had encountered. Prior to delivering the sentence, Kingsbury humbly asked the family for forgiveness for the pain they had endured. Despite not being initially assigned to the case, she expressed her hope for the family's healing, as it would have been their mother's desire. Kingsbury then advised Green to utilize all available resources within the California Department of Rehabilitation. In conclusion, she emphasized to Green that he held the answers to the questions posed by the people. By doing so, it could potentially impact his parole outcome positively. Kingsbury highlighted that she had received positive feedback about Green from his friends, indicating his potential and the positive aspects of his character. She also mentioned that he was young enough to have a chance at a productive life upon release. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and was remanded to the El Dorado County Jail with subsequent transfer to the California Department of Rehabilitation. The decision on restitution will be made following further deliberation by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020 and planned to celebrate with his family over pizza. His attorney, Melissa O'Connell, mentioned that he would be eligible for over $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. While this amount was substantial enough for him to reintegrate into society and start anew, O'Connell acknowledged that it could never fully compensate for the lost years of freedom. Davis proceeded to file a lawsuit against the state seeking damages for the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, amounting to $18 million. The lawsuit named El Dorado County, along with former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, deceased being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Additionally, Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony was included in the complaint. Reports from the Village Life newspaper indicated that Davis was homeless post-release. The lawsuit remains pending as of now. In 1974, a tragic and heartless murder took place, claiming the life of a remarkable young woman named Arliss Perry. My deepest sympathies go out to her family and the entire community affected by this devastating loss. The loss of a daughter for her parents and a wife for her husband is truly heartbreaking. Our dedicated detectives have tirelessly worked over the years to bring justice to Arliss and her loved ones. It is with great pride that I announce the resolution of this 43-year-old cold case. In October 1974, the Stanford University community in California was shaken by the brutal and sadistic killing of Arliss Perry. As a newlywed, she had gone to the university's church one night to pray, but tragically, she never returned alive. For more than 4 decades, the case remained unsolved until advancements in DNA analysis finally revealed the identity of the killer. Arliss Perry, originally from Bismarck, North Dakota, was the youngest of 3 siblings in her family. She had recently married her high school sweetheart, Bruce Perry, and together they moved to Stanford, California. Bruce was a sophomore pre-medical student at the university, while Arliss worked as a receptionist at a nearby law firm. Both just 19 years old at the time, they could never have imagined the horrors that awaited them. On the night of October 12, 1974, Arliss and Bruce had a disagreement while taking a walk on campus. Upset by the argument, Arliss decided to seek solace in the church through prayer. She entered the church shortly before midnight and never returned home, causing great concern for Bruce. A search was conducted, but Arliss could not be found in or around the church. The search came to a tragic end the following morning. When a security guard discovered her lifeless body in the church at approximately 5:45 a.m., Arliss was found lying on the floor, face up, in a spread eagle position. She had been strangled and subjected to molestation, a truly horrifying and disturbing crime. A tall candle had been placed in her private area, while another was forcefully inserted between her breasts. She was brutally attacked with an ice pick at the back of her head. The police observed no signs of a struggle at the crime scene. The security guard, Crawford, had securely locked the church shortly after midnight as he noticed no suspicious activity inside. He even double-checked the doors around 2 a.m. and confirmed that they remained locked. However, when he arrived at the church at 5:45 a.m. to open it for the day, he discovered that the west side door had been forced open from the inside. The shocking state in which Arliss was found left the authorities and her family pondering over the identity of the heartless perpetrator behind such a heinous crime. While every killer possesses some level of conscience and morality, this particular individual appeared to have no boundaries whatsoever. It seemed as though the act had been committed by a bloodthirsty and depraved creature. During the investigation, detectives discovered semen on a kneeling pillow near Perry's body, as well as a partial palm print on one of the candles. Initially, both Perry's husband, Bruce Perry, and the security guard, Crawford, were considered potential suspects. However, neither the semen nor the palm print matched either of them. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office also ruled out any connections between this murder and 3 previous killings in the area dating back to February 1973. Although Perry's husband was initially a suspect, he was eventually cleared of any involvement. Similarly, Crawford, much like the alleged Golden State Killer Joseph DeAngelo, did not raise significant suspicions among those who knew him. Crawford's landlord described him as a good-natured individual who never caused any trouble. While Crawford remained a suspect, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime at that point. However, he had not been completely ruled out. It is worth noting that at least 7 individuals were present in the Stanford Memorial Church on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th, including Perry and Crawford. After identifying 4 individuals, the 7th person remained unknown. A witness observed a young man with sandy-colored hair attempting to enter the church at midnight. He was described as having a medium build, standing at around 5'10" and not wearing a watch. In 1979, David Berkowitz, who was imprisoned for the Son of Sam murders in New York City, sent an intriguing book titled The Anatomy of Witchcraft to authorities in North Dakota. Inside the book was a message referencing Arliss Perry, suggesting she was hunted, stalked, and slain before being followed to Stanford University in California. Maury Terry theorized that Arliss was a victim of a satanic cult that trailed her from Bismarck to Stanford. David also reached out to Stanford police in 1981, claiming to possess information about the Arliss Perry case. Detectives traveled to question him, but he provided no substantial details. The case remained unsolved and was periodically reviewed by the Cold Case Unit of the Santa Clara County District Attorney's and Sheriff's Office. Alleged ties to the cult were finally severed in 2018 when a breakthrough occurred. Utilizing advanced DNA technology, a new DNA sample from Arliss's clothing was compared, leading to a match with security guard Stephen Blake Crawford. Crawford, residing in San Jose, California, was reportedly living off Social Security or retirement benefits. In June 2018, police visited Crawford's residence to execute a search warrant following the DNA connection. Upon their arrival, Crawford brandished a handgun, prompting the officers to retreat. Tragically, he took his own life by shooting himself in the head shortly after. Crawford had long been a suspect and had recently been interviewed by the authorities. During the investigation at his residence, the authorities discovered the torn sleeve of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, and what they believed to be a 2-year-old suicide note written by Crawford after his interview with the detective. Although the motive remained unclear, Crawford was eventually connected to the crime nearly 44 years later. Regrettably, he passed away before he could face trial. This particular case received extensive coverage, including a detailed account of the John Gatroy murders in a February 2020 episode of Case File True Crime Podcast. The alleged connections between David Berkowitz and the Perry murder were also highlighted in the Netflix documentary, The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.